Um, I just wanted to start off by saying that I hope you all appreciate the special moment that you're in right now. I mean, look at this room. This is standing room only. Talking yesterday about 170 people who had registered and 10% never show up or 20% won't show up. This is happening. And can I get a number for the streaming? How many people are streaming in addition to the number of people here? Do we know that? Okay, we're at 200 people out of 170 registrations, okay? I have a little bit of an energy in EU member states. I don't see one that's more exciting than Ireland right now, okay, honestly. So enjoy the moment where you're at right now and keep this momentum going. I'm from the Renewable Energy Agency in Germany. We have a number of programs right now, three that I want to mention that are talking about community energy at the European level. Ireland is involved in two of them. Do I have my people here from, I put up this screenshot from the top screenshot here is from the Twin Cities project on community energy. Do I have the people from Galway in the room here? Here we go. This is what I like to see. Galway is in the room. Do I have Dunleer in the, here we go. All right. So we are working, I'm not in this project, so I have actually not met you. Please, let's talk over coffee. But my colleagues are in this project, and we have other cities around Europe that are also involved. ACT now is with just the Baltic states, so I'm afraid Ireland can't be in it. But then LECO is the one that I'm in, and it's the one I wrote this paper for. So maybe somebody can hold up the booklet here. If you haven't received it yet, this is the printout. It's not even online yet. We went ahead and rushed the print to make sure we could get this done for the conference. So it's at present only available as this printout. And the reason why I think a lot of other member states want to talk to Germany about community energy is for this particular reason. This is one of two slides that I think have been the most viral for the Renewable Energy Agency. And what it basically shows is that we have, these are the numbers from 2016. So everything built up to and including 2016, not just the year 2016. And it shows that private individuals and farmers have built something like 40% of the renewable infrastructure that we have. And so this is where the reputation for Germany comes in. Unfortunately, I think 2016 was the last year where we've had a significant number of, or significant volume of citizen energy projects. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. We had the Renewable Energy Act that sort of drove this the whole time. It started in 2000. It was based on feed-in tariffs, which are administratively set rates for the energy set in consultation with industry. We began switching over to auctions, partly at the behest of DG Competition. The law was passed, revised in 2014, and then we started rolling out the auctions in the years after that. For PV, any PV project below 750, below that level, you can still build under feed-in tariffs. And that sort of market segment is still running at the level it was running at previously, which is fine. Above 750 kilowatts, you have to take part in auctions. You have to win an auction. And just so we understand how big that is, 750 kilowatts is several thousand solar panels. Okay, so you can have a pretty fair-sized solar project outside of auctions in Germany. The auctions themselves for solar are running quite well. One of the main concerns about auctions is you might have winning bids that then do not actually develop later, but we've had a realization rate near 100%, close enough. But the problem is, the main thing that people are complaining about for PV right now is we have this focus on best resources, right? We take the lowest price, and so you end up with projects, wind only in the windiest areas, solar only in the sunniest areas. And we've had rounds of auctions where 50% of the projects are more in Bavaria. Okay, this is like an eighth of the country or something. And this makes sense only from a short-term economic powered, lowest cost of energy standpoint. It doesn't make sense from the standpoint of what the Bavarians might want in the long term. And it doesn't make sense in terms of the total cost of system integration by 2050. It's just not going to work that way. Wind is the same. There's a carve out below 750 kilowatts. This is kind of convenient because there are no turbines available below 800. At least I had a hard time finding one. So this is going to be streamed, so I didn't say the following. It's almost as though someone sat down and said, what's the smallest wind turbine? Set the carve out below that. So we force everyone into auctions. And for biogas, and again, I'm going to show you some charts on all of this. I'm going through this quite quickly. For biogas, of course, the system sizes are different. So it's 150 kilowatts to 2 megawatts. But we have something similar for wind and biomass. We have undersubscribed auctions. Okay, so you tender, you have a call for maybe 100 megawatts and you get 30 or 50 in bids. So we're not even able to build what we are auctioning. For community projects, and this is something that the experts in community energy said, back in 2014 when we started implementing the changes, the risk of losing sort of poisons everything. There's a special reason why auctions are really bad for community projects. It starts off with just the paperwork needed to be done can easily cost $100,000. Right? You need an environmental impact assessment usually. You need a permit. You put a lot of time. You measure the wind resources and so forth. And there's no guarantee of success. And that's what feed-in tariffs actually fixed, right? You knew the price, you could do the calculations, and if you said this looks like it might work, we'll proceed with the project. And now you just don't know if you can win the auction. Now there are remedies for this. You can have lower requirements for citizen groups. You can have a fund that reimburses losses for community bids. But all of these incentives that you come up with are also an incentive for professional development firms to try to appear to be citizen groups, all right? And no country that I've seen, and certainly Germany, has not found a way to fix this, okay? So we incentivize the companies to sort of game the system, and we haven't figured out how to make that work. There's a difference in the ability of these different groups to absorb these losses from lost bids. If I'm a project developer, I may want to take part in 5 or 8 auctions, not all of them in a particular space. I may be working across the country. I may be working across the EU or even globally. And so I will spread my losses across various projects, right? So even in my work, if we place a bid for some call for a communications project, if we lose that, I don't stop. I have to bid again. It's my job, right? And that's the way professional development firms see these auctions. They have to bid again. For a community group, you usually only have one project that you want to do. And if you're developing something in Galway and you lose, you don't go, okay, let's look at Belfast next. It's just not, that's not the way they think, right? They have one project, and if they lose it, they will be so discouraged that they will give up, not try another one locally. If this was a wind farm, they're not going to try the solar roof on the school or whatever. And they're going to start to lose trust in the political system. They're going to think it's not there for them. And all of this is also related to the focus on best resources. So we're focusing on the best resources, solar where it's sunny, wind turbines where it's windy, in order to keep costs down. But this also means that any kind of market player that works nationally is at an advantage over a group that only works really locally. Now, again, there are some things that you can do to try to define what a community group is. We have the de minimis rule. I don't know how the commission is going to respond to this, but under the commission, it was 6 units or a maximum of 18 megawatts could actually, under EU law, go forward without participating in auctions. Again, the Germans did not adopt this. They went for 750 kilowatts, which is 0.5. Another way of trying to make sure that a project is really a community project is you don't get to develop another one for the next few years, or you don't get to have another project down the street. So you don't take a big project and carve it up so that it fits into this small category. Another idea is to have a certain minimum number of citizens, and of course no single dominant shareholder. So you don't have one shareholder, something like that. And again, I've left the numbers out here because whatever works in one place might not work in another. So if 10 citizens works in one country, you might need 25 in another. Okay, this is not physics, it's social science. In Germany, what we had in the first 3 rounds of auctions for wind, for instance, was a minimum of 10 citizens had to be in the project. No shareholder could own more than 10%. The citizens had to have half of the voting rights, and local residents, half of the voting rights had to be in the county where the wind farm would be developed. And this is also kind of tricky because maybe the wind farm is on the county line, and so actually people just in the neighboring county will be affected as much as those within the county. So maybe a kilometer distance is better. And again, I'll come back to some of the specifics in just a second. Before I dive into the specific numbers, I wanted to just show you why I say this is not physics, this is social science. So the numbers are relative. This is a nice overview that the JRC did of the minimum distances that countries have implemented for wind turbines. And as you can see here, they range, most of them are around 500 meters. So you can't build a wind turbine within 500 meters of whatever they define as the built environment. It's usually not a single building, it's usually at least a certain number of buildings. So that definition also varies. But let's say it's 500. Notice that Scotland is 2,000. Scotland's fairly sparsely populated. So I looked up what are the numbers for the most densely populated countries in the EU. Well, look at that. Densely populated, 400. Belgium, densely populated, 400 and 600. And of course, Brussels is a city, so they don't allow wind turbines. But the correlation here is that when you have dense population density, higher population density, you actually are allowed to build wind turbines closer. Okay, and if you have an empty countryside like Scotland, then you can afford to have a much larger distance. But the fact of the matter is, if you have a road, you probably can't hear your wind farm. Okay, so all of this is very subjective. It's not like we can say the number for Ireland would be 500 or 750 or whatever. You have to actually go out and find out. You have to put up a number and see if it's accepted, and then do the footwork and convince people that wind power is good. And then this number becomes relative. All right, so here are some of the outcomes. These are the auctions for onshore wind. And what we see here is that in the first 3 rounds, we had a lot of this citizen energy that was built under these conditions that I showed you just a second ago. What happened was we had basically no actual citizen groups. These were all development companies that had basically sent their employees in and said, you guys look like a citizen group, and when you win the contract, you contract your company and you build it yourself. So it was 100% gaming. And just to make my point clear, I have nothing against these companies. The company that won the most in the first round, I actually love those guys. I have been following them for 10, 12 years. They're wonderful, really innovative. I have never said a bad thing about them. So these are not bad people. They are responding to, they have to run a business, and they are responding to the incentives we set, all right? The trick is, as policymakers, to figure out a way to give them their space and then actually keep citizen energy going. And what Germany did was they said, okay, they're gaming the system, so we cut back the incentives. They cut back the incentives, the gaming disappeared, but the community energy did not come. It's gotten so bad that the auctions are now undersubscribed. So what I mean by over and undersubscribed is if you have 100 megawatts on tender and you get 200 as bids, it's 100% oversubscribed. If you tender 100 and you get 50 in bids, it's 50% undersubscribed. And we have now been, for the past 5 rounds, highly undersubscribed. Okay, so we're just not, we're tendering some amount and we get bids that don't even cover what's on auction. All right. The reason we did all of this was because we wanted the market to set prices. We switched to auctions because we wanted the market and not administrators, not the government, to set prices. That seemed to work well. And then, as we continue here, we see that the maximum bid price is now the average price. Okay, so the administrators, whoever decides what the maximum bid price is now setting the market price as well. So that's no longer working. Okay, and the funny thing is, if you then take a look at those last 2 slides and say, well, why has citizen energy, why isn't it there? I mean, think about it. I said feed-in tariffs, and you knew you were going to be able to build, and now we know the price, right? That's what this last slide is about. We know the price. It's the maximum price. They're all undersubscribed, so if you get your paperwork in order and you accept this price to build, okay? So why aren't community groups doing it? Oh, okay, I'll tell you what, you're my neighbor. Let's do this. 6 months, 6 to 8 months, we'll have our paperwork together. We'll go into that round of auction. But then he says, well, wait a minute, how do you know it's going to be that way in 6 to 8 months? There's no guarantee, right? So whatever the situation is today, by the time we get our act together, who knows? Maybe one company has come in and wiped everything up, and we 100,000 euros spread across 20 people. It's a lot of money for citizens, okay? For PV, we had a similar situation with the price development. Initially, the prices went down. Then they have started creeping back up again. We're not exactly sure why that is. I put the old feed-in tariffs in there as a continued line. So the feed-in tariffs went down over time. They were scheduled to go down. And the funny thing about the comparison between auction prices and feed-in tariffs is that the auction prices are announced before the project starts. The feed-in tariffs you lock into when you actually start producing power and selling it to the grid. So at the end of the project. So it's always been an unfair comparison in a market, in a sector where prices really drop dramatically year to year. These projects have roughly 2 years to build, okay, these PV arrays. If you draw that line out by 2 years, you actually end up sometimes with lower prices than we would have had under feed-in tariffs, and sometimes with higher prices. Okay, so auction prices look better because we report future prices today in a market where prices are dropping for solar and wind year by year. So auctions have always looked better that way. It's almost inflated. For biomass, we have something similar. The bar here shows the amount that was on auction. So we had 133 megawatts, 233 megawatts, and so forth. I think this was 125 and these are 133. So the height of the bar is the total amount that was on auction. The green is how much will be built. That's already a problem. The yellow, or orange, it looks a little bit orange on the screen, is the number of bids that were sent in but lost. They were rejected. And the blue part, which is the biggest part of every bar, is the amount that was on auction but no bids were received. Okay, and if you think that is a dire situation, I put it into context with what was built going back to the early aught years. You can see this was an up and down market, right? So the orange bar shows how much biomass units we built per year. But again, this is what we're auctioning today. It's this little bit down here. If you wanted just to have a renewal rate, just to keep the level stable, you would need something like 300 megawatts a year, because we have around 6,000 and with a 20-year service life. So again, we're only building the green part, and we're only auctioning the height of the bar. Okay, so this is really slowing down. Now, I said we had two graphics that went viral. So this is the second part of my presentation, the second chart. This is about why people are reacting, why we're not building, for instance, a lot of biomass. People have responded to the growth and said, wait a minute, this is competition between food and energy production. They're responding to wind turbines by saying, why are you industrializing our landscapes? So I want to talk for a minute about why these things happen. This particular chart is, along with the one I showed you before about community energy, the shares of community energy. This is our most popular chart. It shows a couple of things, but what it doesn't show is the way it's often read. It's often read to communicate that if you're developing a renewable energy project, you don't need to worry about citizens rejecting you because they like renewables. What it actually shows is a couple of things. It shows that renewables are more popular than fossil and nuclear. It shows that regardless of technology, people who live close to one already accept it more. It's also the case for coal power. Okay, so 37% of people currently living next to a coal plant think it's a fine technology, it's okay. They wouldn't mind living next to one, whereas only 7% don't live next to one, would like to have one. But it doesn't actually show us that people will like a wind farm if you propose it. In fact, around half to a third didn't say they liked it. So, and that's a pretty significant number, all right? So what we need to understand is when we go into a community and propose, for instance, a wind farm, we're not asking people what we're asking here. Here we're saying, do you like wind turbines or gas turbines? When we go into a community with a project, like a wind farm, we're asking people before and after, not wind turbine or gas turbine. Do you like your community the way it is, or do we get to develop infrastructure here, before and after? And it's a fundamentally different issue. And I go into detail about this in the paper about how if we tell people they are NIMBYists, right? You like the energy transition, you're worried about climate change, but you don't want anything in your backyard. This is just showing how arrogant we are. Okay, we're just calling them names, and we're communicating to them that we're not taking them seriously. We think they're hypocritical. Okay, so we need to step back and understand that people have real concerns. All right, when we come into their communities and build infrastructure. This little bit's in German, but I translated it down here. The technology comparison that we just saw is only one of three major pillars. This is from environmental psychology. Okay. It's only one of three pillars of acceptance. So what technology you plan to build is only one of the three aspects you need to take into account. The other two are the process itself and distribution. So the process is, okay, so you want to develop a wind farm and you've done an environmental impact assessment, so you paid 20,000 or whatever euros to this guy who says the park's going to be fine for birds. Well, yeah, I mean, if you pay him 20,000, he's going to tell you the birds are okay. Do you trust the process, right? Do citizens trust that the environmental auditor can actually come back to you and say, don't build it here, move it down the road, you're in the way of the birds? Trust that. I've heard this from Denmark, maybe Louise can tell us this in a second. I've heard that the Danes don't trust their own city government sometimes, and have said things like, or that sometimes they suspect that the city officials just want the tax revenue, right? So go ahead, build near us, give us the tax revenue, and we'll keep the citizens quiet. But again, I'll let her comment on that. I'm not the Dane here. The distribution justice is the issue. The best example is from the Netherlands. So they found out a few years ago that one farmer was getting 2,000 a year and the neighbor was getting 1,000 a year in the land lease for the wind turbine. And everybody found out about it, and then they were like, why are you getting 2,000? It's the same turbine. Why do you get more than me? The government stepped in and said, we don't care if it's 2,000 or 1,500 or 5,000, just you sit down and figure this out. So they had a huge stakeholder thing, kind of like your citizens' assembly, by the way, which was amazing. Like, we are so envious of that citizens' assembly. The Dutch sat down and did something similar. They came out with one price. So now if you own land and they build a wind turbine, there's a price that you get and there's no discussion. So the who benefits more than others debate is over in that respect. So these are the kind of issues we need to look at. One thing that my company did a few years ago, because all of these projects that we're talking about, you know, they may not have a 7-figure budget. We may be talking about 6 figures in a lot of cases. And trying to then calculate, you know, what are the local benefits of that? You know, that can cost a lot of money. You don't have the money if your project budget is $700,000. You don't have $30,000 to calculate, you know, what the local benefits are. So we came up with an online calculator in German, but this is something you could think about doing because citizens don't want to be paid off, right? If I don't like a wind farm, you can't come up to me and say, but you can buy shares in it. Because if I don't like something, I'm not going to buy it, right? But if my community benefits, if you can tell me my community benefits, then I don't feel like I'm being paid off, but I feel like my entire community is benefiting. And so how do we calculate that? And then how do we communicate it? Well, the first step is, of course, to input these things like what bank is doing the loan, where's the bank located, the insurance, the manufacturer is probably from out of town, but maybe there's somebody in the supply chain locally who's doing the operations and maintenance. Did you create 2 jobs locally for this? Where's the tax revenue? Like, what part of the tax revenue is really coming into your local economy, however you define local? And once you have calculated that, then you actually have to actively communicate it, okay? Because people are not going to know. I mean, I think we've all come to a better understanding over the past few years that perceptions are, and facts that are not understood also don't exist, actually. So we have to communicate these things as well. And so you might want to consider coming up with some kind of online calculator for that. Once you've done that, it's not the end of the story, and I apologize for yet another German graphic here, but I couldn't find the original. But what you see here is various aspects in the middle, like land leases, jobs, tax revenue. These are the things you calculate. And then for the communication aspect, you communicate those numbers, but you also communicate these other things that are non-monetary and hard to put into numbers. So for instance, just the trust and the participation that your citizens will have, the increased participation that your citizens will have in local decision making. That's a benefit and a value in and of itself. And tourism is also listed here. And I just want, is that 5 minutes or 3? 5. Okay, then I'm good. This is one example of tourism. So this is a community in a sort of low-income area without any industry in Germany. It's sort of over near France and Belgium. And they had an idea in the 90s to build over a valley there, to build the world's largest suspended footbridge. And they didn't have the money. And then somebody developed this wind farm. Now, I don't know how well you can see this, but those are wind turbines. And this is the footbridge, okay? The wind turbine, the wind farm came in, was built, and they started kicking back some of the money into the community budget. And then they remembered this old idea, and they said, yeah, let's do it now. We got the money. Admission is free. If you can stomach walking across this thing, I haven't seen one this big, but I've tried to do smaller ones. It's really frightening. My knees give way. But it's free if you can manage it. They make money just by bringing in the tourists. So the hotels are full, the restaurants are full, and this has led to, this community being one of the most financially sound in this struggling region, okay? So they're taking some of the revenue and thinking of ways to reinvest it to bring other people in. At the same time, I have to issue one final warning before I give you my last recommendations. I've been doing this and traveling to various places. Really, it was North America, trying to get other countries to copy what Germany was doing. And we were successful in Ontario. And the result in Ontario, they sort of adopted German-style feed-in tariffs around 2008, I think. And the result was the biggest backlash against wind power that we've ever seen. And the reason was, we found out that this mechanism, we thought it would pull the community groups into the energy sector. And it turns out that the law that facilitates community energy, it doesn't pull a string, it pushes a string. You can't actually incentivize community energy with a law. The communities in Germany brought about the law. The grassroots movement in Germany brought about the law. It pulled the law into existence. In other words, if your communities are not in the starting blocks ready to go, if they're not monitoring the legal changes, then when you give them the legal changes, the people are not sitting there monitoring this, and they're not going to get started. The people who are going to get started are the development firms who are monitoring the policy changes. And so Ontario was swamped with professional development firms developing projects. There were some, I don't want to undersell the success, there were some community groups that got started, but we learned a really painful lesson here. The law does not create the grassroots movement. In Germany, the grassroots movement literally created the law, okay? So if your citizens are not in the starting blocks ready to go, and I don't know this, you tell me, the law's not going to get them interested. So we have to think about ways, give them the law, give them the space, give them the incentives, and then think about ways to actually get this going. My recommendations, I kind of almost want to skip the top ones because we've talked about them already. I'm just repeating myself. But these have been coordinated with groups like RESC, DGRV in Germany. So these are not just my ideas. This is sort of my synopsis of what European community energy groups are calling for. And I've left out the numbers intentionally. So the minimum number of locals should be large. I didn't say 50, I didn't say 25 or whatever, because you have to figure this out in Ireland. I can't tell you, right? Nobody knows. Just figure it out. Work with your people. The one that I would really is number 5, because I haven't mentioned this one before. Create a one-stop consulting shop to provide community groups with expertise and to access applications. Now, I don't know that I'm going to get this right. Orla was telling me yesterday about some idea or project, maybe it's already running, where you have somebody in every community sort of acting as a facilitator. That's kind of what I'm talking about here. And it's also going to be the point, if this person is a facilitator, it's going to be, part of that person's job is going to be getting citizens excited about these projects, okay? So have some expert. They don't have to know how to develop the projects themselves, but they need to know how to navigate the paperwork. And so the citizen groups who are interested, they would go talk to this person. That person would give them feedback, and when they apply for stuff, that person also reviews these things so that we don't end up with rejected applications because of formal errors, right? And I don't know what organization, you have so many organizations here today, and I'm sure they all want to be this one-stop consulting shop. That's a fight for you to have. But something like that would be very good. Germany didn't have something like this, but we had other things like the KfW Bank, which backed loans, low-interest loans for renewable energy projects. So people who wanted to do something could go down to their savings and loans bank on the corner, and the banker could just pull out a 2-page form and fill it in, and it was all ready to go. You didn't have some grand review that could slow you down. So we've had similar things in Germany, but the one-stop consulting shop is where we are now at the European level in terms of proposals. So I guess I'm finished then. Oh, one last note. I wrote a history of what happened in Germany, and you're welcome to buy it, but you're also welcome to write me an email and say, send me that PDF. I'm willing to read a PDF. Everybody who writes me gets a PDF of this book. All right, thank you.